Hello, I'm Lisa Howe, Health Coordinator for the Bullitt County School District. Thank you for participating in our Medication Administration Training Program for non-licensed school personnel. If this is your first time with medication administration as part of your job requirements, I recommend that you print off the Medication Administration Study Guide before continuing the program. This can be found on the Health Services webpage. You will need to complete the final exam once you have completed this video in its entirety. Print out your certificate of completion and bring it with you to a skills checkoff when you meet with a nurse to complete your training. More details and dates are listed on the Health Services webpage. We have a lot of information to cover. Let's get started. This course was developed collaboratively between the Kentucky Department of Education, the Kentucky Department of Public Health, Kentucky Board of Nursing to ensure compliance with Kentucky administration regulation and regulatory statutes. This curriculum is the official training program for all unlicensed Kentucky public school personnel who accept delegation to perform medication administration. The purpose of this course is to provide uniformity in the training across the state of Kentucky, improve safety, reduce liability, and remove education barriers. All unlicensed school personnel who accept the delegation to perform medication administration must show proof of a completion of this course. Training is not complete until the exam is passed with 85% or above and a score of 100% is achieved on the skill competency evaluation. If you should fail either exam, you are allowed to repeat the failed portion once before having to repeat the course again. Local Board of Education shall require proof that all unlicensed school personnel who have accepted delegation to perform medication administration in school have completed a training course provided by the Kentucky Department of Education. This video serves as the official training course required for medication administration. For many of you, this is not your first training, since the training is only valid for the current school year. Here is a breakdown of the 4 modules that will be covered in this video. Legal issues, policies, and procedures. There is more to handing a student medication and keeping the bottle in a drawer. Students with increasing number of chronic complex conditions or illnesses attending school, increasing number of students that require medication, whether it be scheduled medication or an over-the-counter for a symptom, or an emergency medication used for potentially life-threatening situations. With each of these scenarios, there is a potential for an unsafe medication administration. This may result in an unsafe environment for the student and possibly liability for the district. So why discuss the laws? We do this to reduce potential liability, increase safety, remove barriers, increase understanding and compliance, and it is now part of the law. KRS 156-502 defines health services and the provisions that will be made for students needing direct health care. This same law also addresses the Liability Protection Act for school employees performing health services. It is called the Federal Paul P. Coverdell Teacher Liability Protection Act, as you saw on the previous slide. Employees who have been trained and accept the responsibility of performing the procedure are granted liability protection, unless evidence is clear and convincing that harm was caused by the act or an omission of the act. A second liability protection staff have when performing health service is that the task and the employee are working under the nurse's license. You know who can prescribe medication as you seek out your own medical care. Nurses are licensed to administer medication exactly as prescribed and are not allowed to change unless approved by their prescribing health professional. Title of school nurse can apply to a variety of persons. Some states, a licensed professional is not required. Each different nurse title involves different education preparation and scope of practice. Our district currently uses RNs on staff. LPN scope of practice prohibits independent practices and requires the LPN to work under the supervision of designated RN, MD, or dentist. They are not able to delegate the performance of health services to school personnel. Kentucky Board of Nursing has the legal authority to regulate nursing practice in order to safeguard the health and safety of citizens of Kentucky. When the nurse transfers the performance of the task to an unlicensed school personnel, the nurse maintains accountability for the outcome to safeguard the health and the welfare of the students. So even with school personnel performing the task, The delegating nurse retains the responsibility for the outcome. Only RN, nurse practitioners, and MDs can delegate health services in a school setting and supervise the delegated trained person. Upon completion of this course, the non-licensed school employee will demonstrate competency by those listed in this slide: administration of student medication, verification of student instruction for self-administrating of medications, administration of emergency medications for students with diabetes, allergic anaphylactic reactions, and seizures. When deciding if a task can be delegated to school personnel, certain things must be taken into consideration. Is it prudent to do so? Would the task require the non-licensed member to use independent nursing judgment? And can it safely be done? Depending on the task that was delegated will determine how much supervision will be needed by the person delegating. For instance, how stable or fragile is the student? How competent is the person doing the task? Or how complex is that task? Today's training is delegating only medications to non-licensed school personnel. Supervision of the delegating nurse does not require the nurse to be physically present in the building, but does require the nurse to be available for consultation by phone. Supervision is defined as the provision of guidance by a qualified nurse with periodic observation. The unlicensed school personnel agrees to and has the responsibility to always follow the school district's policy and procedures and perform the task in accordance to the training received from the delegating RN, nurse practitioner, or MD. Unlicensed school personnel should only accept a delegation that he or she knows is within his or her skill set or knowledge. He or she must always report any significant information, contact the nurse for any questions, and or if they feel they have made an error. Never assume anything. Please ask. Remember, the training is only good from July 1st to June 30th, no matter when the training was received. Confidentiality is an important legal concept and of utmost importance with health issues. If you have been to a physician recently, you have heard of the HIPAA. That law protects your health and information in that setting. The Family Education Rights and Privacy Acts, also known as FERPA, is the federal law that protects the student's privacy and their educational records. Health information and health records are protected by FERPA in the school setting. Health information should be shared by school personnel only on a need-to-know basis and never with other students or the general public. If a student shares the health information to an unlicensed school personnel, this information can be shared with a nurse, but not with others that do not need to know. Certain medical conditions require students to have an individual health plan and a red folder. These packets give more detailed information regarding the student's health and may include an emergency action plan. Substitute teachers are all on a need-to-know, as well as bus drivers transporting that particular student. All school districts should have written policies and procedures on medication administration. Bullitt County is no exception, and ours can be found under Chapter 9 of the Policy and Procedure Manual that is online under the BCPS website. Some of the important points outlined in 09.2241 AP.1 include: no medication will be administered without proper district forms being completed by parent and/or physician. All medication is brought to the school in the original prescription bottle with label. This would be including our inhaler boxes. We know that many times medication arrives with the students on the bus, so please take every opportunity to educate and remind our parents of our policies. The label on the box or bottle should pertain to the student for which the medication is ordered, and no handwritten changes made to that label. To ensure our students' safety, we must make sure that the current medication form matches the label on the medication to be administered. If there is a discrepancy, then either the label or the medication form must be corrected so that everything matches. If there is a change to be made to either the dosing time or the amount of medication to be given, then a new label and a new form must be received as well. Expiration dates are very important, as medication should never be given past that date. The district utilizes a medication administration form that includes permission for two students to self-carry and to self-administer medications. On this form, two different medications can be addressed. Always make sure the form is completed in full, including the portion the parent signs at the bottom. This area would be the third liability protection that non-licensed school personnel have when administering medications to students. If the medication listed is a prescription, or if the parent is wanting an over-the-counter medication to be kept longer than 3 days, then a physician must sign this form. If the medication is an over-the-counter medication and would be needed less than 3 days, then the parent's signature is all that would be needed. To review, a new form is obtained when there is a change in medication, dosage, time, or frequency, or if you receive a new bottle indicating a change. As best practice and to protect yourself, always count the prescription pills with the parent when they are brought to school. This is another safety practice to ensure that everyone is in agreement to the total. If the medication arrived without a parent in attendance, then have another co-worker count the amount of pills received with you. Then write that number on the back of the medication administration record and both witnesses will sign. Here's an example of where to document what you receive from the parent and obtaining a second signature after counting the pills. This form is very important to use with all medications to avoid confusion and discrepancies as to what the school has in possession for that particular child. For an over-the-counter, it is acceptable to write 1 bottle of Tylenol or half a bag of cough drops. Over-the-counter requires a medication form which is different from our medication prescription form and can be given for just 3 days with parent signature. The medication can be given longer if needed as long as we have a physician's signature on our prescription form. These medications also must be in the original container. No Ziploc baggies are acceptable. Do not administer beyond the expiration date. In order to keep the medications at school to a minimum and to reduce errors, always ask your parents to provide just enough medication for the 3 days allowed. Then follow up with the parents past the 3-day interval to pick up any unused medications. Always refrain from giving a medication if you are unsure of any part of the administration. Parents may not request changes to prescribed medication without the nurse contacting the provider. How we do this second statement in Bullitt County is that our policy states that every form and label must match, so school employees are making contact with the provider to update the forms. If a parent requests that you not give a medication, then they must make quick arrangements to pick up the medication and remove it from the building or send a physician order to hold the medication. Then you would document either the parent picked up the remaining doses or a statement was received from the physician to stop the medication administration. Students are allowed to carry and self-administer certain medications in our district if proper documentation is on file. These medications include inhalers, emergency medications, as well as any medication the provider feels necessary. If medication is being carried on their person, then the paperwork must indicate that approval from the provider. Another regulation that pertains to medication administration in the school setting is KRS 158834. This addresses self-administration of a medication, and the physician's signature and their initials on our district form tells us the following: that this child is capable of administering the medication, knows the purpose of the medication, when and how to administer it, and knows when to seek out the help of an adult. No documentation of administration is required for students that self-administer, but it is still our policy to have completed forms on file in the office. These medications should never be shared with other students, and if found doing so, disciplinary actions must follow. We will review this statute a little later when we discuss field trips. Except for emergency medications, all medications in our district will be kept under lock and key with limited employee accessibility. In other words, not everyone should know where the medication key is kept in the office. Office staff are responsible for making sure that the medication counts are kept accurate. For students receiving medication throughout the school year, it is recommended that no more than 1 month's supply of medication be stored on school property. Is Tylenol locked? Yes. ADHD medication locked? Yes. An inhaler locked? No. Tylenol and any ADHD medication would be under lock and key. An inhaler would be considered an emergency medication and should never be under a lock. Use the back of the medication administration log to document any disposal of medication. Have a witness to co-sign the waste. Inhalers and EpiPens can be placed in the sharps containers that is used for needles. Never pour any medications in the sink or flush in the toilet. For pills, we will pour glue in the container, and once hardened, we can dispose of in the garbage. And for liquids, we will mix with cat litter. Advance notification of all field trips is very important to make certain a medically trained employee will be available if needed. If a student is attending a field trip away from school, a designated trained person must accompany any student that might need medication administered. Thus, trained unlicensed school personnel must stay with the student in case the medication is needed. Unlicensed school personnel cannot give medication to another school employee or a parent chaperone to administer. KDE conferred with the Kentucky Board of Pharmacy, and it was decided that the laws do not allow for repackaging of medication for field trips. Review the field trip permission form with your parents well in advance so that they can reach out to their pharmacy for an extra bottle and an extra label to use for this trip. If not, then the medically trained school employee will need to take the full bottle on the trip. Never transfer a few pills into a Ziploc bag for this trip. In submitting a field trip request on the TRIP software, the person that is current in the medication training should be the one listed to avoid a follow-up phone call for clarification. Having 1 to 2 backups is a good practice. For a field trip that will occur during the school day, the front office must be notified well in advance. A copy of all medication permission forms will be made, and medications that are to be administered along with any as-needed medications will be gathered. Once you administer a medication on the field trip, you as the medically trained school employee will write the time and your initials on the back of the permission form. When you return to school, it is very important that you transfer that information onto the medication administration record. Then a copy can be shredded. Also, it is very important that you return the medication bottle to the office. It is a good practice to count the prescribed medication with a coworker prior to leaving for the trip. And when the bottle is returned, again, this avoids any confusion and discrepancies. For example, you take 10 Adderall tablets on your trip, and when you return, you ask someone to count the medications to ensure that you are bringing 9 back. If a child has a diabetes packet or asthma packet, severe allergic reaction packet, or a seizure packet, make sure a copy of this accompanies you on the trip. A student with an emergency medication needs to remain with the school employee trained to give the medication. Keep in mind that medication not normally given during school hours may become a factor on an extended field trip. It is amazing how students can be in school for months without medication, but field trip forms indicate previously unknown medications and medical conditions that we now have to address in a short period of time. Please allow ample time to obtain all necessary medical paperwork. The Medication Administration Record, MAR, that is used for school covers only the school days in session. If you will be taking an extended field trip, then you will need a blank MAR to use. Open discussions with your parents in advance to see what accommodations you might need to arrange for regarding the student's medication, such as refrigeration. Kentucky laws only address provisions of health services in school setting. Federal law covers health services for field trips that require out-of-state travel. The scope of practice and the delegation rules specific to each state may need to be taken into consideration for field trips. For this reason, trained personnel may be responsible for the storage of the medication, but the student may self-administer with a trained personnel to supervise. Our district medication form addresses field trips specifically so that the school employee knows their role on the trip, especially when going across state lines. Pay particular attention to the first or second box. If they are checked, then you may travel with your student to any location. The first box states trained personnel to assist student to self-medicate, which means the school personnel will hold the medication until dosing time. The second box has an asterisk and states student to self-medicate, which means the student will hold the medication and self-administer. The asterisk then directs you to the statement below the box and asks for MD initials. Remember, self-administration regulation is that a physician must make that determination, not the parent. If the second box is checked, then there must be a physician initials below the box stating the student is self-sufficient. Let's talk about the third area in this specific to field trip section. It states the employee will hold the medication until dosing time and will administer the medication. Administer is the key word and makes the assumption that you are putting the medication in the mouth. This is one area we must pay close attention to for all our field trips. If you are staying in Kentucky, then your medication training is recognized, and that would be fine for either an emergency medication or a scheduled medication that might be needed. If you are leaving the state of Kentucky and it is checked for an emergency medication, then you are still okay to travel to any location you desire. Emergency situations are handled differently in the legal world. However, and this is very important, if that third area is checked for a routine medication and you are leaving the state of Kentucky, then you must get with Health Services Department to discuss further options. All of this takes time for thorough review and cannot be done in a short time frame. Students have the right to refuse medication, and this is not an error. Document the refusal on the medication administration record. This documents that the medication was offered as ordered. The nurse parent should be notified as soon as possible. Parents must follow policies in order for you to administer medication to their child. If paperwork is missing or the medication is placed in a Ziploc bag, then you do not administer. Notify the parent as to the reason. If a student refuses his lunchtime medication and wants it later in the day, or a dose was missed before they left home in the morning, then these medications cannot be given. Our policy is that a medication must be given 30 minutes before or after it was ordered. Parents can come in and administer a missed morning dose medication, but make sure it is well documented in your notes so that your pill count stays accurate. Medication errors are serious and occur when any of the 6 rights to the medication administration have been violated. They can be the wrong medication, the wrong dose, the wrong time, given the wrong way, to the wrong student, or not documented, and that child received an additional dose. The potential for any of these errors exists in a school setting, especially the wrong medication, such as switching Tylenol for Motrin. If ever unclear, refrain from giving and contact appropriate personnel. What to do if an error does occur? For the safety of the child, admit that the error had occurred and keep the student in the office. Or if in the class, when the error was noted, then send someone to find the child. Observe and document the status. For any distress, call 911. Otherwise, notify a school administrator, parent, and their physician if able. Again, accidents do happen, and in the best interest of the student's health and safety, report all these errors promptly. To avoid making common medication errors, focus on the task at hand. Avoid distractions when performing medication administration. Prepare and administer one student's medication at a time. Administering to only one student at a time will help decrease potential for errors. Look at that label 3 times when administering the medication, when removing from storage, when removing from the container, and when returning the bottle to storage. You saw the child's name and the medication type 3 different times to ensure accuracy. When calling the Poison Control Center, there are no privacy violations. Give them as much detail as you can. If you're unable to follow their orders, or if there could be a delay in following the orders, then make sure they are informed of that situation. For example, you are at Bernheim Forest and they say to have the child drink 16 ounces of water, but you have to walk a mile to reach that water. This would be something the center needs to know, as they might suggest something different for you to do for the student.